Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm Catherine Hadro in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thanks for joining us. In this week's show, the Little Sisters of the Poor are back in court. Hear the latest on their legal battle. We respond to French President Emmanuel Macron's comments on big families and educated women. And this.
It's like Mother Teresa said, you know, if abortion's not a sin, then what is?
Super Bowl champion Matt Birk tackles the abortion issue and explains why he's proudly pro-life. But first, we go straight to an interview with a pro-life Catholic member of Congress to address research funding of aborted baby body parts. CNS News broke the story last week. The National Institutes of Health signed a $13.8 million contract with the University of California at San Francisco to obtain aborted baby body parts to implant into mice for research. The report follows the cancellation of a similar FDA contract for aborted baby parts last month. Joining us now from Lincoln, Nebraska is Representative Jeff Fortenberry. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Catherine, always a pleasure. Thank you for your good work.
Absolutely. First off, Congressman, what is your reaction to this $13.8 million contract involving research for aborted baby body parts?
Well, first of all, as you're aware, it's prohibited that body parts from aborted unborn children should be sold. And so to have another venue now in which our government is entangled with this unethical behavior is deeply disturbing. As you pointed out, there was a contract that the FDA approved earlier. To the Trump administration's credit, they canceled that contract and are doing an investigation as to how this could have happened. But I think the deeper question that's begged here is the ethic. What is going to be our ethic moving forward in the 21st century? And it really needs to revolve around two words: human dignity. In most, I assume, embryology textbooks, it used to be at the University of Nebraska, life is defined at the moment of conception. Everything that genetically makes us up is present there at the moment of conception. So that is the reasonable, logical, scientific position. But now we have a new ethic emerging that science can do whatever it wants, whatever it can, versus whatever it ought. And what we ought to be doing is good science, reasoned research that protects the inherent dignity of all life, no matter how small, and not getting confused about this ethic because it will lead to monstrous outcomes potentially.
You were one of the 85 members of Congress who signed a letter objecting to a previous contract involving baby body parts. Congressman, why is this continuing? Well,
it's up to me, it's up to you, it's up to the larger pro-life community in America to speak clearly, to speak consistently about an ethic that where no person or no thing is ever thrown away. And so this idea that we could lift baby body parts from abortion and somehow turn it into some good is a deep, deep contradiction and wounds, of course, those of us who are pro-life and don't want our taxpayer dollars entangled with this. But it speaks to this contradiction of an ethic where no person, no thing should ever be thrown away. And so it's a harder question because we're at a crossroads, I think, in terms of our political community, in terms of our culture, as to where we are going to go. And again, if we would go back to the basics of science, that everything present for life is there at the moment of conception, and build from there about a culture of commitment, no matter how hard the circumstances, and a science that is focused on what we ought to do to save lives and prevent disease. We won't get into this dystopia, this distortion, the Hunger Games, where the strongest survive, those with the most political power are those who are simply looking to profit from unethical research. And that's where we are at a crossroads. So it's a deep, both political question as well as a cultural question. But you ask it the right way. How in the world does this keep happening? One thing that gives me a little bit of hope, though, is your generation, the next generation coming up. They're seeing this contradiction for what it is. They are very empathetic and relational. They want to be inclusive and uphold the value of diversity. But how can we do so when we're excluding an entire group of persons, the unborn child or the mother that brings them into the world? How can we do that? It's a grave contradiction. So you have this new movement of young people wrestling philosophically with this, and hopefully that makes some political differences over time. But in Congress right now, this is a very deeper fight. You have very hostile voices against any idea that would promote this consistent ethic of human dignity, that life that begins at conception is worthy of protection, and science ought to adhere to that ethic. At the very least, we ought to keep taxpayer dollars entangled from promoting a distorted ethic like this.
Turning now to the midterms, as November 6th is rapidly approaching, there have been a lot of discussions about Senate races, but what would you say, Congressman, to voters about the importance of maintaining a pro-life House of Representatives?
Do not overlook the House of Representatives. For instance, we just went through a very difficult appropriations budgetary process. A lot of the outcomes are somewhat disappointing to the pro-life community, in that organizations like Planned Parenthood, completely entangled with the abortion industry, funding is not completely removed from them. However, something that is overlooked is the fact that educational funds, almost $200 million of which would have gone to Planned Parenthood for comprehensive sex education, are now no longer there. That is a very significant pro-life victory. It does not happen without a House of Representatives that is decidedly pro-life, that is pursuing reasoned policies based upon sound science, or at the very least assuring that the taxpayer that their dollar is not entangled with subsidies to the abortion industry. Secondly, the issue of the court system. Now, that's not directly involving the House of Representatives, it involves the Senate. But nonetheless, having people with a pro-life ethic invite others to the case, press their viewpoint through a reasoned manner, and vote, be engaged in the political process, makes a difference on who you send there. You have very hostile voices such as Chuck Schumer or Patty Murray, who are opposing anything like even protections for conscience rights for healthcare workers. This is a very difficult fight. And third, again, I think it's very important to look at the victories that we have already made, not just in terms of stopping certain funding, like I mentioned earlier, but earlier, as little as 20 years ago, only about a third of the House of Representatives considered themselves to be pro-life. Now over half do. These are gains. These are small, incremental, but essential gains to trying to shift ourselves to a culture of commitment, a culture of compassion, a culture of inclusion for all persons, no matter how small. And if we don't participate in the process, this doesn't happen. So, Catherine, congratulations to you. Congratulations to EWTN. Thank you to everyone who listens to this very important program for year after year, doing the hard, difficult, messy business in an imperfect environment of trying to move us to this culture of compassion, this culture of community, this culture of commitment to all of those, even the least among us. It's very important that we stay engaged, and the basic duty of a good citizen, of a pro-life citizen, is, of course, to vote.
Representative Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska, thank you so much for your time today, especially in this busy time ahead of midterms.
Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much, Catherine.
For more analysis, we turn now to Autumn Christensen, the Policy Director for the Susan B. Anthony List. Autumn, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
First off, can you speak to Congressman Jeff Fortenberry's record as a pro-life leader?
Oh, yes. So from the moment that he came to Congress, being pro-life and speaking out for the unborn was among his top priorities. And now on the Appropriations Committee, he's able to be right there in the forefront fighting day in and day out on that powerful committee. So we're so grateful for him.
And we are just over a week away from November 6th, from the midterms. Can you put into perspective for us how significant these midterms are for the pro-life movement?
Yes. You know, people think about presidentials, and those are certainly important, but those congressional races are so important. Just in the last couple of years, we've sat here and talked before about many of the really amazing and important pro-life policies that this administration has put forward. Those could be nullified if the Congress falls into the wrong hands. So each and every one of these races across the country is just essential to protecting the Trump pro-life agenda and promoting pro-life work across the board.
Can you highlight some of the specifically female leaders the Susan B. Anthony List is endorsing for the Senate?
We are really excited to have 6 candidates running for Senate. One that comes to mind right off the bat is Leah Vukmir, and the work that she has done in her state of Wisconsin. She has not only authored the Pain Capable bill there, but even has taken on Tammy Baldwin in debates and really spoken out for the unborn. So she is really an amazing and important candidate. Right next door, we've got Karen Housley, who is in Minnesota. Minnesota, we're excited about her. Down in Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, who has been a stalwart leader in the House, is now just duking it out for that Senate seat in Tennessee. We've got Cindy Hyde-Smith down in Mississippi, McSally in Arizona, and Deb Fisher in Nebraska. So a lot of really amazing candidates that we're very excited about.
We'll continue to see what happens on November 6th with those races. And finally, we are nearing the halfway point for President Donald Trump's first term in office. How significant is the Senate in advancing his pro-life promises?
Well, the incredible legacy of the Trump-McConnell partnership will be judges, and over 80 district and circuit court judges have been confirmed. We need to continue that. We need a strong pro-life Senate to continue that effort. We feel like we're just on the other side of the Kavanaugh confirmation, but there's a possibility that there could be one or more vacancies during the Trump administration. So, Clarence Thomas, there have been rumors that he may retire. There are 2 other justices, Ginsburg and Breyer, who are in their 80s. So there's a lot of potential there for potential openings both in the Supreme Court, and then that work at the district and circuit court level is so important.
Absolutely, a lot is at stake right now. Autumn Christensen, Policy Director for the Susan B. Anthony List, thank you for coming by.
Thanks.
With less than 2 weeks left, the countdown to the 2018 midterm elections is on. While midterm elections historically have lower turnout rates, the stakes this year are incredibly high, and the pro-life movement needs to show up at the polls. With that in mind, here's this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and pledge to vote pro-life this November. Once you get to prolifeweekly.com, you can enter in your name and basic information to sign this petition. Be sure to share with your friends and neighbors so they remember to keep life in mind this November. The pro-life issue is a foundational one. How a political candidate views the most vulnerable gives us a key insight into his or her values. Being pro-life must be a priority. No Catholic can responsibly take a pro-choice stand when that choice in question involves the taking of innocent human life. We must keep the unborn in mind when heading into the polls. With the clock ticking until November 6th, be sure to register to vote, educate yourself on your state's candidates, and go to prolifeweekly.com to pledge to vote pro-life. Turning now to more news, the Little Sisters of the Poor were back in federal court last week defending themselves from a new lawsuit by California's Attorney General. California Attorney General Xavier Becerra is attempting to strip the nuns of their religious exemption to the HHS mandate. The Supreme Court last year directed Health and Human Services to issue a new regulation so religious nonprofits, including the Little Sisters of the Poor, had legal protection from having to provide services in their health care plan that violate their faith. But shortly after the regulation was passed, Becerra sued to take away the Little Sisters of the Poor religious exemption, bringing the sisters back to court. Montse Alvarado is a vice president and the executive director of Becket, the religious liberty law firm defending the Little Sisters. Becket also defends EWTN and our contraceptive mandate battle. Montse, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much.
First off, how did things go in court on Friday?
I think things in court went really well. Oral argument went well, and the court recognized that there was good reason to develop and enforce this rule, and not just because it was something that was developed with this administration. They recognized that the Obama administration, in the years of litigation that went through with the Little Sisters of the Poor, had admitted in their loss that there were good reasons for developing and enforcing this new rule.
That's excellent to hear. And I think it would surprise viewers to know that this battle isn't over. We remember there was a Supreme Court ruling last year concerning the Little Sisters of the Poor, but can you remind our viewers the extent of that ruling?
Exactly. They did win their case in court, and the Supreme Court told the agencies that they had to go back and figure out how to provide these drugs and services without forcing the Little Sisters to be a part of that delivery system.
And also last year, President Donald Trump issued a religious liberty executive order. What kind of protection did that offer for the Little Sisters of the Poor?
The executive order was basically a signal, a reminder that the government has to take religious liberty seriously. It has to take these questions seriously and protect religious liberty as a First Amendment freedom. And so the agencies, I think, heard that message and decided that putting out this new rule was the right thing to do, and protecting the little sisters was the right thing to do.
Are we expecting further action from the administration on this?
We need a final rule to come out, which is what we've been waiting for, and that's why California and Pennsylvania decided to sue against it.
Now, it was California Attorney General Xavier Becerra who brought the Little Sisters back to court with this new lawsuit. And our viewers might recognize the name Xavier Becerra because he also brought NIFLA, the chain of pro-life pregnancy centers, to court, and David Daleiden. What does that say to you? What kind of trend of cases is Becerra bringing to the court?
People of good faith want to find common sense solutions for this. And you can provide these drugs and services to women without having to involve or force the Little Sisters of the Poor to do it. I think it says something about an individual who doesn't want to leave the Little Sisters of the Poor alone, who wants to drag them into court. He actually tried to silence them by keeping them out of this case, and we had to petition to let their voices be heard so that they could make their case on why this is so important. Because they just want to go back and do the work caring for the elderly poor that they do so well. They've been doing it for over 170 years.
That's beautiful. And you know, this whole conversation really is about the beautiful work of the Little Sisters of the Poor, and yet they've been in this contraceptive mandate battle for 6 years now. How does that distract and take away from their good work?
It is distracting. I mean, how would you feel if you thought you had government fines looming over your head? Thankfully, they are the type of women who believe in providence and who know that they are on the right side of history, and I hope that the courts will recognize that.
Well, thank you for your good work and for clarifying all these questions that we had concerning this case. Montse Alvarado, a Vice President and the Executive Director of Becket.
Thank you.
When we come back.
I thought to say that God bless Planned Parenthood is just an asinine thing to say. So I just checked the box no and didn't mean for it to become a big deal.
Super Bowl champion Matt Birk tells us about the time he turned down an invitation to the White House because of his Catholic pro-life views. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. The role of the family in building a culture of life is decisive and irreplaceable. St. John Paul II coined the phrases culture of life and culture of death during his pontificate. We celebrate the great saint on his feast day this week, October 22nd. St. John Paul II, pray for us. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. A speech that French President Emmanuel Macron made last month has recently caused an online uproar. Take a listen to comments made at a Gates Foundation event that are stirring up controversy.
I always say, please present me the lady who decided, being perfectly educated, to have 7, 8, 9 children.
President Macron, consider your wish granted. We present to you educated women with large families. Following Macron's comments, Catholic University of America economics professor Dr. Catherine Becket launched a Twitter campaign using the hashtag Postcards for Macron. A mother of 8, Becket showed Macron a picture of her and her large family. Other educated women followed suit. Just take a look at some more of these responses. A Stanford graduate, mom of 11. A medical doctor, mother of 7. A law degree and 12 children. From these few examples alone, it's clear high fertility is not a roadblock to economic growth. Not only is President Macron wrong, I take personal offense to his comments. My grandmother is a mother of 10 children, my mother being her youngest. Here's a picture of some of the family. For my grandmother to have a large family is not a sign of stupidity or ignorance. In fact, she's very bright with a master's degree in education. Her large family is a sign of love, of openness to life, and that she trusted in God's good graces. And I'm sure glad she did, or I wouldn't be alive. Ultimately, this Twitter campaign is not about having the most kids or the fanciest of degrees, but that President Macron, as it turns out, is the one who needs an education. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's very important call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and pledge to vote pro-life this November. To speak up for the unborn takes courage, which is why it may come as no surprise that St. Thomas More, a man who showed courage until the very end, is our next guest's confirmation saint. Matt Birk is a Super Bowl champion and a now retired NFL player. But what's perhaps even more essential to his identity is his Catholic faith and pro-life views. Here's part 1 of our interview with the sports star and father of 8. Matt Birk, thank you so much for taking time with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Now, your pro-life views really came to the spotlight back in 2013. You're on the Super Bowl championship team, the Baltimore Ravens, were invited to the White House with then President Barack Obama, and you declined the invitation. Can you take us back to that time and what brought you to making that decision?
So yeah, it's a long story. I'll try to make it as short as I can. But essentially, at that point in our lives, my wife and I were very involved in the pro-life movement. And when the invitation arrived in the mail, I had retired from football, and but got the invitation to attend the White House. 2 days prior to receiving that invitation was when President Obama became the first sitting president to address Planned Parenthood. And at the end of his speech, he said, "God bless Planned Parenthood." And it just, where that season of my life where I just retired, and some of our children they're old enough to know about abortion and knew what we stood for. And I just thought, I really don't have any, personally, I just didn't have any desire to go. I didn't really want to participate in that. I thought to say that God bless Planned Parenthood is just an asinine thing to say. So I just checked the box no, and didn't mean for it to become a big deal. And then when I didn't go, I was the only player not there, and some of the reporters were calling me and were kind of pressing me on why not. I think they thought that I was mad at the Ravens or something. And I just, in today's day and age, and even back then, it's just really hard to run and hide from people, So I thought, well, I'll just tell them. I have nothing to be, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm standing in the truth. And so I told them, and then that's when I discovered firsthand what the 24-hour news cycle is all about.
What kind of reaction did you get from your teammates? Were they supportive?
100% positive.
Really?
Yeah, in fact, a few days after that, we had our ring ceremony, so the whole team was brought together again, and so many, everybody from the top of the organization on down came up to me and thanked me for taking a stand. Yeah, it was 100% positive. That's why I'm a little, a lot of times people say, oh, it took so much courage and bravery to do that. I mean, it didn't. One, because I'm standing on the side of truth. And two, over the years, I've had, 1 million people come up to me. Some people I know, some people I don't. They stop me on the street, they recognize me, and they thank me for doing that. So I've received so much encouragement and inspiration and support from other people, and I try to give that back to them, because it's a fight that we're all in together.
And that brings me to my next question. You mentioned you are retired now, but can you give us some insight into what it was like to be pro-life and Catholic in the NFL? Was the football culture supportive of that?
There's not a ton of Catholics, but tons of Christians.
Okay.
Football's actually a very spiritual game. Even from its beginnings, but if you think about football's very dangerous. It's hard. In the NFL, right, you have these high highs and low lows, and so a lot of guys, if they're not close to Jesus when they get to the NFL, a lot of them find God there.
And what kind of platform has it given you to speak about these issues of faith and the pro-life issue?
Well, it has given me a platform. I mean, the NFL is a huge deal in our culture, so I appreciate that, and I look back at my own personal journey, and I say, okay, God, now I sort of see what you're doing here, but I consider it such an honor to be able to share my faith with people. If that helps inspire them, I get to speak at schools and churches and to young people and to old people. At the end of the day, we all need encouragement, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I look at my life. In college, I raised cradle Catholic, 2 devout Catholic parents. But I got to college, I fell away, and I got to the NFL, and I really bought into the ways of the world.
Really?
And fortunately, I came back to the faith. And so, if I can prevent somebody from making the same mistakes that I did, then that's great, right? But we all know we know that we're in a war with our culture right now, and Catholics more so than any group you can be anti-Catholic in today's society. You can't be anti anything else, and so try to encourage people, and I tell them to be tough and be strong and to be Catholic, because it's not always easy.
And you've been able to speak at the March for Life twice now. What was that experience like, and why did you feel it was important to be there?
Yeah, I just think that, boy, you talk about all the problems and issues and challenges and things we fight about. I mean, abortion is still, it's the #1 thing. It's like Mother Teresa said, if abortion's not a sin, then what is? And so I don't think there's any hope for our society if we can't get that right. So it was ironic that the first year that I was asked to speak, I accepted, and my wife and I were expecting an adopted son to be born around that time. So actually, the first time I spoke at the March for Life, my wife wasn't there. She was actually in a different state, picking up our new son.
Your youngest.
And so I got to speak at the March for Life as my wife was literally holding our newest son that came through the gift and the blessing of adoption. And anybody who's been on any side of that knows that adoption is such a beautiful thing. From birth mother placing her child up for adoption, I think is the most selfless act of love that I've ever witnessed personally here on earth, to how that child, into our family, and how my wife and I and other sons and daughters, just, that people ask, is there a difference between your biological kids and your adopted kids? And anybody who's been a part knows there's absolutely no difference. From the second we brought him home, he's our son, he's our brother, and it's just, I just can't imagine my family without him. I can't imagine my life without him. But for me, just also the gratitude that I have and the admiration that I have for his birth mother to do what she did.
Don't miss part 2 of our interview with Super Bowl champion Matt Birk. But for now, that'll do it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'd love to hear from you before next week. Email me at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or like my public page on Facebook so we can keep this pro-life conversation going. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.